So I'm in the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable conference in London, England, speaking, and I have the delight of meeting Robin Anne Fitzgerald, who is Newfoundlander, who's been living in Norway since time began. So we're not sure whether she still speaks English, but she's going to have a shot at it. We've been having some fun with that. The important thing here to know is that Robin has been with her company, and I'm going to ask her to introduce her company as well. But Robin has, with her company, gotten rid of budgeting altogether. And also, we're here to talk about some of the myths around transformation, because one of the mantras I often hear when I go into organizations is about how long it's going to take, how difficult it is, and it is definitely difficult if you use methods that don't fit the complexity, if you use methods that don't fit the community of interactions that are going on in companies. However, that's not necessarily true. So, Robin, let's start with, if we may, first of all, welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And now let's talk a bit about what's your company doing, and what happened when you started doing this transformational process. What are the key ingredients you used?
Sure. The name of my company is Eidsiva Energi. It's a hydropower. It's predominantly a hydropower production company. We own 44 different hydropower plants. We produce electricity and distribute it on the grid, on the electricity grid, and we also sell electricity to the customers in Norway. We also produce bioenergy, and we also deliver broadband to customers. I began in the company in 2009. As you said, I'm from Newfoundland in Canada, and I've lived in Norway for 13 years, so my English is a little bit rusty. I have a master's in economics from Memorial University in Newfoundland. I graduated there in 2004, and I came to Norway originally to do my master's thesis with an oil company at the time. So I came here for what was supposed to be 6 months. And then after that, I found out that I liked living in Europe, so I learned Norwegian. And then I began working at the oil taxation office in Oslo, worked there for 2 years. After that, I began in a consultancy company within oil and gas, and I worked there for 2 years, and then I began in Eidsiva in 2009. I started as a controller and worked as a controller for different subsidiaries for many years, and now I've gotten a new job. I guess you can translate it as manager for strategy and analysis and business performance. How I got into the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable environment was from 2013 to 2015, I did a master's in performance management and leadership at the Norwegian School of Economics in Bergen. And it was Bjarte Buksnes, who is he's one of the head guys at the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable. He had a presentation for my class at the time. So that's when we had thought about getting rid of the budget for years and years, but that's when we really started getting going with the thoughts of getting rid of the budget.
What motivated getting rid of the budget? It's the most intriguing decision ever, and because most people start freaking out over, oh my gosh, if you don't have a budget, what do you have, and how do you know what you've spent? And the mind just takes off in a variety of questions. So, what inspired getting rid of the budget, and what did you replace it with?
First of all, I think the Hackett Group did they did a study in 2008, I think it was, where they found out that 73% of American companies use 3 months or more on the budget process, and we found, 3 months is it's not, of course, not 3 months in like it's spread over time, but we found that in our company we were using even more time than 3 months. There were people that for the budget process for the next year were already starting the budget process before summer vacation. So we were, in a sense, using 6 months on the budget. So that was one aspect of it. The other aspect of it was that we found that when we made the budget, most of the assumptions that we made for the budget were out of date even before the year started. And there was another company that did a study where they found out that over 50% of companies that the assumptions for the budget were out of date before or within 3 to 6 months of setting the budget. And like I said, for us, we found out that, we would make a budget with the electricity price, which electricity price. We would choose an electricity price in October and say, okay, this is the price we're going to use for the budget. And then we would get to December, January, and we would see, well, the price has changed totally, so we have to update the budget. And I mean, a lot of people sitting in the board or sitting in top management think that you can just push a button and say, here's a new price and update the budget. But it's not that easy. So you would have people sitting with the yearly accounts trying to focus on that, and then they would get the question, well, now can you update the budget with the new electricity price? So basically, we just saw that what's the point of this? Because then you would come to January, choose another, you would update the electricity price, but I mean, that price is not really any more relevant than the price that was in October. And when you come to March again, the price is just as irrelevant as it was probably the price that you chose in October. So that was another reason why we chose to get rid of the budget. And the third reason, there's 4 reasons actually. So the third reason was that we found that the budget in the company was being used for many different purposes, and often purposes that were conflicting. So we were using the budget, for example, to set goals. And we were also using the budget for control purposes and allocation of resources. So what we saw was there could be tendencies to gaming, whereas when you know that you're going to be measured against the budget for the rest of the year, sometimes even maybe your wage and your bonus was connected up to the budget, that people would, well, not necessarily purposely, but that it leads to that you don't set ambitious goals in the budget, because the worst thing that can happen is that you don't deliver in terms of what the budget says you're supposed to deliver. So that was the third reason. We saw that the budget was just being used to purposes that were conflicting. And the fourth reason, and the final reason, was that we saw that there were several studies that were actually showing that the budget was negatively correlated with profitability. Especially there was a man named Trond Bjørnenak. He works at the Norwegian School of Economics. He did a study about 81 Norwegian banks, where they actually showed that the banks that had budgets were delivering poorer results than the banks without budgets. Of course, you can discuss cause and effect here, but when we saw that there was empirical evidence that companies that didn't have the budget were more flexible and delivering better results, then that's what really was like the final nail in the coffin for the budget. So that was the background.
Wow, I'd love to see maybe afterwards you can send me the link to that study, because the whole question in banks right now and the financial sector is probably the most furthest behind of all the sectors in terms of what's going on in innovation. And so any examples where there are other banks that are not using budgeting would be really great people to have on this conversation, I think, on this program.
Yeah, and I know one of the biggest leaders in the beyond budgeting world was Handelsbanken and Jan Welander in the 70s, that they got rid of the budget and they haven't had a budget since.
Yeah, I think they're the only one we can so far name that most people know, but I'm hoping there's more out there. Now let's get a little bit into the transformation process, because making the decision to sort of say, let's get rid of our budget, could have the effect of everyone running around. Even though you've got 4 perfectly rational reasons, it can always run into beliefs that people have about how the world works, and you have to have money, budgets, because if you don't, how are you going to know you're profitable? All those kinds of things. So what went in place of budgeting? When you pull out a budget, was there a transition strategy? Did you put something in right away? How did you manage that whole transformation process? Because I know it's been a lot easier for you than the belief that it's going to take a long time, be painful and difficult, and so forth.
All right. Well, what we did was, like I said, I started studying at the Norwegian School of Economics in 2013. And in 2014, me and 3 of my colleagues, we were doing a paper on, first we had the presentation from the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, and then we decided to write a paper on my company about getting rid of the budget. So this was around February, March 2014 that we started up with the work. And I said to my colleagues at the time, we can try and get rid of the budget in my company, but I don't think we have any chance at succeeding, but we can give it a try. So I was a little bit pessimistic to start off with. So what we did was, first we started off with trying to see how do other companies that are like my company, so in the electricity business, what do they use as their tools for ensuring business performance. And so what we did was we sent out a quest back to, I think it was like 80 people within the electricity industry in different companies, where we tried to find out what kind of tools do they use. What we found out was that I think over 90% of the companies were using a budget, and they had few other tools that they were using to ensure business performance. So after that, and after we had discussions with other companies and how they use the budget, after that what we did was turned our focus on my company. So we did interviews with many people in the company, including people from the board, people from top management, and people that were producing the budgets. So typically it's like bosses that are, I don't know what it's called, bosses that are making the budgets. So we sat down at least an hour with each person, and maybe we interviewed probably 25, 30 different people, and asked them how they experienced the process, how they experienced the use of the budget, and started, kind of like softening them up with the thought of getting rid of the budget. And we were pleasantly surprised, actually, that many people in the company were negative to the budget, because I was fearful that people would express fear in getting rid of the budget, and that they felt that it was a good tool, but actually most people felt that the budget wasn't a good tool. So after we talked to all these people, then we looked at, okay, what other tools does the company have in place if we get rid of the budget? And we can come back to that, what we do instead. So we looked at what other tools we had, and we found out that we had like 10 different tools in the company for ensuring business management, performance management. So I think, in a sense, that made it easier for us to get rid of the budget because we had so many other tools in place. And after that, in June, we were finished with the paper and passed it in. And then when we came back from summer vacation in August, it only took more than maybe a month to get the decision. We went straight up to the board to get the decision on getting rid of the budget for 2015.
So let me interject here and just do a little exploration, because the fascinating thing is you've interviewed everybody, so everybody's engaged in the conversation. You've already got that activated, which is a fantastic way to start, because otherwise the decision comes down and people go, what just happened? I didn't get to say anything. How did the people who actually are making the budget, because this is the place that could theoretically be the most threatened, they're immersed in it, it's their jobs. How did they feel about it, and where did they shift to in the process of, I'm in charge of making the budget, to I'm not in charge of making the budget? There is no budget.
Yeah, exactly. I think some people were positive, some people were negative. Not negative in the sense that, I think it was more fear of losing control. But what we focused on in the discussions was minimizing that fear and trying to explain to them. Well, first, like I said in the introduction, trying to explain to them why. The 4 reasons that we saw that we wanted to try something new, and trying to explain to them what we would do instead. And I think when they saw that, oh yeah, we do have a lot of tools here instead, maybe it's not a huge crisis if we cut out one of those tools, and maybe it'll actually be a relief in a sense to get rid of something that we feel. And some people say, well, I felt like all I was doing in the quarterly reporting was just copying and pasting the same thing that we said last time, because you were constantly comparing to something that was at a date. So I think it was about focusing on about going in dialogue with everybody, that like all the stakeholders at different levels, and explaining to them and then trying to minimize that fear. So I think it's really about just making it simple and not making the process too complicated. And I think what it was, in a sense, what we did was we just said, well, okay, what's the worst that can happen? Let's cut out the budget for 2015. We'll explain what we'll do instead. And the worst thing our company is not going to go bankrupt after 1 year. People don't forget how to budget. So if after 1 year, if we don't succeed, if we see that costs are rising, or if we see that income is falling, then the worst that we'll just begin to budget again next year.
Yeah, so great. The first thing is you engage the social system in the conversation, and then secondly, you treat it as an experiment, not a pilot.
Not a pilot, no, because it was full out. We're getting rid of the budget. It wasn't a pilot, but it was an experiment. Yeah, that's a good word. It was really an experiment. Let's see what happens, and what's the worst that can happen.
So I know that the minds in the back of my head would be going something like, well, did they lose their jobs?
Yeah, the people you mean the people making the budget?
Correct.
No. Oh, yeah, that's a good point, because we were very clear in that, yeah, budgeting takes a lot of time, but we're not doing this to downsize. We're not doing this to get rid of people. We're doing this because I found that economists in my company were using 80% of their time to look backwards and 20% of their time to look forwards, whereas I was using 80% of my time the other way, and I wanted more people in that group.
Excellent.
That's what we were saying. That's what we focused really on, that we're trying to turn the focus to looking forward and least amount of time looking backward.
Yeah, excellent. Now, how do you know, now that this is, because it's 2 years, at least 2 years in, correct?
3 years now without the budget.
Yeah, 3. I love that. How do you, what does the company measure value creation by? What's the lens that you use now?
Well, what we saw when we were doing the paper, we saw that our company had a lot of tools already in place, and I think that, like I said, that was an advantage. So maybe if you're another company starting out where the only thing you have is the budget, maybe it's easier if you implement some other tools before you cut out the budget. So we had strategy plans, we had action plans, we had the balanced scorecard, we had benchmarking. We had the account, we had the books, we had, profit and loss, balance sheet, income statement. We had forecasts, we had profitability analysis, we had long-term forecasts for 15 years, and we had risk analysis. So the only thing that we were talking about cutting out was the yearly budget and the yearly investment budget. So of, say, 10 tools that we had, we were going to cut out 2 of them. We have quarterly reporting to the board in our company, and what we do is we have, of course, quarterly. We have the books quarterly, so we have the profit statement and the income statement and the balance sheet. We have that year to date compared to same period of last year. In addition, we have forecasting. And when I say forecasting, because I often get met with, yeah, but that's just the emperor's new clothes. It's like the budget 4 times a year. When I'm talking about forecasting, I'm talking about more top-down forecasting. What are the key drivers for the different businesses in our group, and not bottom-up budgeting. So maybe you use maybe a day on making the forecast compared to using several months on making the budget. So we have forecasting for this year, and we still do for the year. We don't do like a rolling forecast. We do the year, mostly because our owners are municipalities and they operate on like a yearly. They have their budgets, so we found that maybe rolling forecast would be a little bit confusing for them. So we kept the year forecast for the year and a more detailed forecast for next year. So we have forecasts 1 to 2 years. In addition to this, we have forecasts, which I work a lot with, forecasts 15 years, because you have to remember my business is a really long-term type of business. When you're going to invest in a hydropower plant that's going to be there for 100 years, you have to think really long-term. So we have basically it's no more complicated than an Excel model that does simulations 15 years forward in time, and that we update that with prices, electricity prices, electricity certificate prices, interest rates, cost forecasts. We update that quarterly. So we have 1 to 2 year prognosis, forecast and a 15-year forecast. In addition, we have the balanced scorecard. And how we do it in my company is that we have, I don't know if you're familiar with the balanced scorecard.
I know of it. I have not used it myself, but I know of it, of course. Yeah.
The balanced scorecard is basically, it's one sheet where you have different KPIs, key performance indicators, that measure different aspects. So you have the financial aspect, you have quality and business processes, you have the customer aspect, and then you have the more organizational, human aspects of it. In our company, we have 4 different business units, and each business unit has their own balanced scorecard that they follow up. And then the group has, where I work in the mother company, we have also our own balanced scorecard. And then people always ask me, yeah, but how many KPIs do you have? I bet you have like 30 KPIs for the whole group. And I was like, no, actually, we only have about 10 KPIs that we follow up. So it's quite manageable.
I'm really glad to hear this because it was a question I was going to ask you before, and because sometimes these companies get massive numbers. They start getting KPIs at levels that nobody needs KPIs at because they're measuring quantity. They're not looking at the goal orientation. What I appreciate about what you've been saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's almost like the company focus has shifted to achieving goals versus achieving all these little micro indicators.
Yeah, exactly. So we have focus, and we update our balanced scorecard yearly. You can, in a sense, compare it to the budget. But what we say is that if we find out throughout the year that one of the KPIs is not relevant or it's not important anymore, we actually have the freedom to get rid of it or take it out of the balanced scorecard if we feel that it's the right decision to do. But with the sense that our business is so long term, we haven't really experienced yet that we had to take out one of the KPIs. But what we do focus on is not having too many. Because when you have too many, then you lose focus and you start micromanaging like you're talking about. So we try and find key drivers that represent all of the 4 different business units, and then aggregate that up so that the leadership, the management at the top can have focus on the key drivers for the entire group. Excellent.
Now, how is this approach you took? How have you noticed it's changed either decision making or leadership in the company? Any shift in the dynamics there?
One of the important things is more people are looking forward than back, and I experienced that we're more agile. We can make decisions quicker. Because we have other tools, we can go in and say, okay, we don't have an investment budget. I'm shocked every time someone tells me that they have an investment budget where they're like, okay, we're going to invest in these. I mean, if we did it in our company, if we did it once a year, where this is the different investments we're going to make each year, instead of, okay, when you get closer to making the investment decision, that you put that investment decision in an Excel model, as an example, with updated costs, updated income forecasts, updated prices, updated interest rates, and you can see how does that affect our key figures, how does it affect our forecast in the long term, how does it affect our ability to borrow money from the banks, what do they say about how we stress test it pretty much against our result. So I think it's made decision making, I think, instead of focusing on, because when I started in the company, we didn't have this long-term. We had long-term focus on the engineer side, people building the hydropower plants. We didn't have long-term focus on the economic side. I think we were very focused on just this year, delivering this year. Now we have much more long-term focus also on the economical side.
Now you've got bioenergy in your mix of things. Did that emerge as a consequence of this?
No, we had bioenergy before the budget, before we got rid of the budget.
And so it does sound like it's enabled the company to pivot its focus from looking back to looking forward. Any other unexpected bonuses that you've observed?
I think that one benefit is that before, when we had the budget, when we were going, especially, and you have to take into account that an investment decision for us is quite an important decision, because it could be several 100 million Norwegian kroner in a decision. And I think before we were doing that, in a sense, we were making decisions almost blindly, because we didn't see how, we didn't have the ability to see, because we were just focusing on this year. We didn't have the ability to see, okay, if we invest in this hydropower plant, or this, we also have wind power. If we invest in this, and it's going to be there for 25, 50, 100 years, we would look at the analysis. We would do an investment analysis for that concrete project, that exact project, but we couldn't see how it affected the entire group. So now we have the ability to put that single investment in our plan for the entire group, our long-term model, and see how it affects our key figures. We didn't have that ability before. Before we were like, okay, do we have the money? Is the net present value positive? Then do it. If it's not positive, then don't do it. Whereas now we have the ability, and also this is very important when the power prices have fallen the last few years, we have the ability to see it as a whole and prioritize investments. So even though the net present value is positive, doesn't necessarily mean that we can invest in it, because if it causes our interest costs to go up because we're pressed with regards to borrowing money from the bank, we have now the ability to see how does that one investment affect the entire group. So we have the ability now to prioritize our investments.
Yeah, so it sounds like you moved from a fairly narrow frame into something that gives you more of a systemic view of what's going on for the company. I love that. From a decision-making point of view, it's brilliant. It just gives you much more to work with.
Yeah. And like I said, I think I'm a little bit schizophrenic, actually, with regards to the balanced scorecard. I'm going a little bit back and forth, because sometimes the balanced scorecard can also be a dangerous tool, in a sense, because you can trying to find KPIs that fit into these 4 different groups in the balanced scorecard. It can be difficult to find relevant KPIs, and you're almost finding KPIs just to find them, just to have the 4 different groups. And then you can also get in the sense where you're finding KPIs that are a little bit, that's the budget for that KPI for next year. So I've kind of like toyed with the idea of suggesting for top management to getting rid of the balanced scorecard and just having forecasting. But I'm a little bit fearful that if I suggest, because I think the board really likes the balanced scorecard, because it gives them an eagle eye view of how the business is going. I'm a little bit afraid that if I suggest getting rid of the balanced scorecard, that they'll say, well, we have to take the budget back. So I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, understandable.
And I think that our balanced scorecard, in a sense, as long as we manage to keep it to maximum 10, 12 KPIs for the entire group, I think that's complicated enough and it's detailed enough, so it's not taking a lot of time to produce. So I mean, I think it works for us, and I think that when the board looks at the balanced scorecard, they can see, okay, how are sales going, how are our costs developing. You can even see how satisfied are the people, the employees working in the company. And you can see what's it called? Sick leave. That's one of the KPIs that we have. Customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction. So you can see a broad spectrum of the business, and not just focus on the financials.
Any tips you'd like to give companies that are listening to our conversation on making this move in a way that is not difficult and, you know, all of the mythology that goes with change.
Yeah. Well, I think I've been participating in the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable for the last few years, and I've been speaking to especially a lot of Norwegian companies that have been talking about making the change, getting rid of the budget. And I really believe the fact that there's 12 Beyond Budgeting principles, and maybe half of them are about what you do on the reporting side, but half of them are also about what you do on the leadership side. And I think they're really intertwined. But in the sense, I think that if you're so focused on trying to make a plan for every little thing that's going to happen, you won't take the baby steps. Because I see that I'm meeting the same companies over and over, and I'm getting frustrated. I was like, you still have the budget. Maybe you could just try cutting it out. I'm a little bit frustrated that people, I think maybe they feel that they have to have such a big plan, and they have to have a plan for everything that could happen, that they're just not getting started. So in a sense, it's like, okay, choose the most important tools for your company, and suggest for the board that we just try it for a year and see how it goes. And I guarantee them that they won't miss it, because now we're 3 years without the budget and we haven't missed it. And I really think we won't go back, at least not as long as I'm working here.
Well, I mean, to be honest, going back to looking at the past will completely prepare you for failure, because there's absolutely no way that looking at the past predicts what the future will look like at this point in time. So, anything else?
Yeah, communication. This is a question that how did we communicate? How did we communicate because there's 1,000 people that work in my company. A lot of people ask me, how did you communicate to the entire organization that you're getting rid of the budget? And the simple question is, we didn't. We didn't tell everybody. And I bet if you ask people, a lot of people still work in the company, a lot of the men and women that are working out on the hydropower plants and making sure that they're running optimally, they don't even know that we don't have a budget. We didn't go out with an internet news bulletin that we're cutting out the budget. What we did was the key stakeholders, the people that needed to know, knew that we were cutting out the budget and going over to simpler forecasts. And otherwise, we didn't communicate it. We didn't make a big deal out of it, because we wanted to minimize the fear. Yeah, so we said, well, let's not make a big deal out of this. And I would actually really strongly recommend that for others, because if you think of big companies, 20,000, 30,000 employees, you can't create understanding of the change that you're making for everybody. So just focus on the key stakeholders.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you, Robin. I love the conversation. Thank you for being on the program.
Yeah, I noticed that my English wasn't perfect, but I did my best. It's unbelievable that you can lose your mother tongue, but that's just the way it goes when you speak another language all the time.
It's excellent. No problem at all. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. You are listening to the Insight to Action podcast. My name is Donna Jones. I'm the host. My work involves deep dynamics and providing the insights that help decision makers and leaders move up levels and more advanced skills to work with the complexity and the uncertainty of today's world. I also do a lot of work in the area of innovation for change, particularly transformation, so that it's much more fun, less effort, and faster with better results overall. I tend to work with early adopters because we're experimenting to find out what's going to work best for everyone. You can find me on from insight2action.com, on Twitter at EPDAWNA_Jones, or on LinkedIn. And I also wrote Decision Making for Dummies and have a chapter in The Intelligence of the Cosmos on deep dynamics. So thanks for joining me. Hope you enjoyed the program. Share, help me get the word out. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks so much.